I'm following Breeze up to Virginia because I had credits to use, and I could just step on the plane and step right off. But I'm going to see my niece and nephew. So since I'm leaving at 6 a.m. on Christmas and flying to Richmond to see them, I'm wearing my Santa suit, and we're going to go out like candy canes at the airport, mess with TSA a little bit, and get on the plane with the Santa suit on.
You're gonna change after you get through TSA?
No, I want to see my niece and nephew in the Santa outfit. So I haven't got some slide-on sandals I can wear with socks.
Are you gonna check your bag?
I'm checking one with the presents. And
It'll
everything.
just be a bag. Yes, like a.
Oh, have I got another bag with the candy canes and stuff?
Like
in?
a
I'll carry
trash
that on.
bag.
Yeah. I've got a red pillowcase I use for that. Yeah. This is my first time Santa Claus. I just don't. I'm not. Johnny doesn't need to know that because he tries to hit me up every damn year. Santa's not bad. Santa's not bad.
I just lose my bag. That's why I'm.
I figure there's only like 15 people on the flight so far. So if they can't keep my bag straight here in Richmond, we got problems.
Good.
Been already paid for it, so we got that going for us. Oh yeah, we're using this.
All right. Work session is in progress.
All right, this is our fourth work session on short-term rentals. Today we're going to review a new idea, limited short-term rental licenses. We have been gathering feedback on the short-term rental ordinance since it got voted in on February 7th. We presented a first bunch of amendments to, group of amendments rather to council back in March, technical amendments. At that time, council asked us to continue to gather feedback for a future review. Late in the summer, when the election date changed, we let everyone know that we would be coming back post-election and reviewing every topic area that's been suggested by staff, council, the public, anyone. This is our kind of our comprehensive review of all things short-term rental cap related. Today, Wes, can you go to the next page? This is the list we've been working through, and you'll see down at the bottom additional study areas, limited short-term rental licenses. This is a new idea. The presentation today is meant to give an overview of how that concept would work with what we've been talking about. It's not pro or con, it's just a review of the interactions of this idea with the other things. We have promised repeatedly to give every idea its chance to be discussed, and that's what we're here for today. So, limited short-term rentals. Next page, Wes. So, a limited short-term rental license would offer a 72 rental night license to properties that are currently ineligible for ISTRs. Today, under the cap, all 4% dwellings on Folly Beach are eligible for a 72-night rental license. It's called an OSTR. The license itself doesn't limit the number of rental nights. It's your property tax classification. But generally speaking, every 4% owner on the beach is already eligible for the equivalent of an LSTR. Those property owners who do not claim this as their legal residence and are taxed at a 6% rate have two options today. An ISTR, which we're currently over the cap, we're not issuing any additional licenses, or no rentals. And the no rentals is kind of the issue when we start talking about our discussions about property inheritance and property purchase. So the LSTR concept sort of originated from that train of thought. Is there anything to do for folks who inherit or buy a property? We can't give them an ISTR, but we could possibly give them a limited amount of rentals. The third point there, if council is interested in the idea and decides to go forward, staff definitely recommends that the number of ISTRs be re-examined and lowered. If we're expanding overall licenses, that should definitely be paired, in staff's opinion, with a reduction in the amount of unlimited licenses to kind of keep the net rental nights somewhat equal. And then the last point, even with all these changes, no license is transferable. I know it's a matter of semantics, but I just want to repeat that. No license is transferable ever. If you die, you sell your property, you close your account, the new owner has to get a new license account. So when we talk about passing licenses or buying licenses, we're really talking about the ability to relicense a property, not to maintain the same license. Okay. Next up, Wes. So, and now I'm just going to go through every topic area that we've discussed so far and how this idea would interact with that. So, in terms of definitions, an LSTR would basically replace the current OSTR. An OSTR right now is a 72-night rentals issued to a dwelling unit that is the legal residence to be used as a short-term rental. It's 4% properties in shorthand. This would change that definition to no longer rely on property tax classification, but actually the number of nights rented. I know that's a subtle difference, but an OSTR today isn't limited to 72 days, the license itself. It's your underlying property tax classification. If you rent more than 72 days and we find out about it, we can report you to the county, you will lose your 4% rating and then lose your OSTR. But the actual license isn't day limited. An LSTR would be strictly 72-day rental limited, no longer depend on the underlying property tax classification, and it would be any unit, 4%, 6%, multifamily, condo, single family, any unit could potentially qualify for it. And then investment short-term rental licenses would be, not only are they not a legal residence, but they are rented for more than 72 days. And we just would have to clean up the types of licenses we issue, replace owner occupied with limited short-term rental. We would keep the provisional short-term rental license that we adopted recently, which is to allow for rentals for the Vacation Rental Act. When you buy a house that has rentals, it could have up to 90 days of rentals on the books, which you have to honor. We want to make sure the city has the ability to issue a first-year license for up to 90 days. For instance, it's not an ISTR, it's not an LSTR, because it could be used between 72 and 90 days. Anyone who qualified for that license would then, when they renew, it would be switched to an LSTR and back down to 72 days for future years. Any questions on those definition changes? All right, Lee. Sorry, from council, any questions from council? All right, Wes. So the cap limits and transferability. I want everyone to note the asterisk, and that is a placeholder number only. We had a week of business days to turn this around. We've not had time to fully evaluate every aspect of it, so this is purely a placeholder number to indicate the concept that right now today, 56% of 6% owners hold licenses. At the cap, that'll be walked back to 47% would hold licenses. If we expand licensing, again, staff heavily recommends that we lower the cap proportionately. We threw out 675 as a cap on ISTR licenses to sort of offset the rental nights. The last point there, more time is determined. We need more time to try to figure out historical saturation rates. We know that for many years, licenses on Folly Beach were not limited. And there was never a point in time where every property on Folly Beach was a rental at the same time. We have data from 2018 through 2020 that gives us the percentage of 4% and the 4% and 6% properties that were rentals. Very broadly speaking, it went from 34% to the low 40s, 43%. We haven't had time to go back and look post-2020. So we don't know how many ISTRs to offset until we can make a reasonably defendable estimation of how many 72-day licenses would be granted. This is just a placeholder for discussion. You know, if all 897 6% owners who don't have licenses under the cap came out and got a 72-day license, that reduction would be much greater. If only 400 of them come out and get a 72-day license, the reduction wouldn't be as severe. But as a placeholder, in the time available, just the concept that if we create this license and if more owners apply for it, then we should offset it by limiting the unlimited licenses. Any questions on that idea?
So you essentially would raise the cap by 400 during the summer months when it's probably more beneficial to rent, correct?
It wouldn't be raising the cap.
Well, you would be effectively for those 2 months going to 1,200 houses, basically.
But where do you get 1,200?
800 plus you said 400 houses.
Right, so again, placeholder numbers,
I'm not using that as a hard number, but that's a pretty close ballpark.
assuming that everyone rented at the same time.
Yes.
And just as a reminder, there are also approximately 700 OSTR licenses out there now
Sure.
that could be used. So you could add those numbers into that everyone is going to.
But I would grant the 6% users are going to be a little bit more incentivized to use this license.
Well, you granted it, so
Yeah, okay.
I'm not sure if that was a question or a statement.
All right.
All right, any other comments? All right, caps and transferability. Again, just a placeholder number, the cap would need to be lowered, and a reminder that no license is transferable. So even a limited short-term rental business license is not transferable. Nothing drastic on this slide. Next, Wes, please. LSTR and the SC Vacation Rental Act. This goes back to the provisional rental license. Not every property that's sold with rentals has more than 72 days of rentals, but some of them do. And we don't want to create a situation where we legislate ourselves into another corner and have to come back to you guys for a technical amendment immediately. So we'd keep that kind of license basically to cover the 72 to 90-day rentals under the SC Vacation Rental Act. If you bought a property that had less than 72 days of rentals on the books, you are required to show us those rentals when you come in to get a license. So we would just go ahead and issue you an LSTR off the bat, and you wouldn't have to do anything different next year. Property transfer. In the context of ISTR licenses, we've had some discussions about what counts as property transfer. The most recent proposal is to go with South Carolina law. There are some things that are not counted as assessable transfers of interest. If you put a property into a trust or LLC that you solely control, that doesn't count. If it comes out, that doesn't count. Adding a spouse to the deed. There was a long list that we presented at the last meeting. So all those things would still apply to ISTR licenses. If your property transfer was allowable, you would not lose your ISTR license. If your property transfer was an assessable transfer of interest, if you sold it to another person, if you sold the LLC to another person, those would count and your ISTR would still be up for revocation. An LSTR, we wouldn't be involved in how you transfer the property because the next owner would have the right to come and get it. So property transfer would only apply to ISTR. All right, Wes. Demolition. You can't get an STR license unless you have a unit to rent and that unit has received a certificate of occupancy. In the context of ISTR licenses, we've had to decide what level of demolition counts as a loss of the structure. We proposed a 50% rule. Council asked us to come back with replacement bedrooms, replacement square footage. We're bringing you guys back that in January, but demolition would only really feature into review of an ISTR license. If you had an LSTR license and you tore down the structure or you did 50% damage, or you can still come back and get an LSTR license. So this would also shift the question of demolition to only ISTR licenses. Late renewals. Licenses expire every year on April 30th. In order for the cap to truly function, we need a firm deadline for ISTR licenses. We can't leave them hanging for months and months and months because the city has to renew, find out who didn't renew, move to revoke the licenses, process the appeals, and then publish the amount of licenses available. So for the cap to function, we need that firm deadline for ISTRs. The penalty for a late ISTR eventually becomes, we move to revoke your license if you did not renew in time. For an LSTR, the penalty would match other types of business licenses and be a late fee. Right now, that's set at 5% per month, but because there would be no cap on the number of LSTR licenses, those license holders could have a little more leeway to come in late because they're not basically going up the system. We just take your license late, you pay the fee, and we go from there. We have confirmed with the state that that particular portion of our business license ordinance is not governed by the Standardization Act, so we have a little freedom to mess with the penalties. Should council like to, we could make the penalty for a late renewal for an LSTR that if we revoke your license for the rest of the year and you come back and get another one. We have options in terms of penalties, but the basic idea would be ISTRs are revoked if they're late, LSTRs pay a fee. Partial 6% ratings. So we're not talking about buildings that have multiple dwelling units, like a duplex or a triplex, where one dwelling unit is 4% and other dwelling units are 6%. These are 4% legal residences that have one or more rooms taxed at 6%. Currently, we've got a proposal in front of you guys to characterize those licenses as OSTR licenses, but since our current definition is tied to the property tax rate, there would be no limit on the number of nights you can rent that room because the county still gives you 4%. So the county, in writing, has confirmed that they're not interested in how many nights someone rents a partially classed building, not two separate dwelling units, but if you have a 4% residence and the county has given you 6%, they will not revoke your 4% if you go over 72 days with that partial rental. So how would we do that in terms of an LSTR? Is that we would, we're divorcing from the tax rate here and just going by the number of days rented. So this would limit partially taxed structures to only 72 days. Because we're no longer worried about your tax rate, just how many nights. So structures who had a building permit prior to the referendum, an LSTR would be available for every dwelling unit, and anyone who cannot get an ISTR because they did not have a certificate of occupancy prior to the moratorium and later the referendum would be able to apply for an LSTR. They can't get an ISTR, they could apply for this. And same principle applies to those properties who were caught in the first year renewals, who had never gotten a valid 2022 license. Those folks are still ineligible for an ISTR. They have to get on the wait list. An LSTR will let them come in, limited night rentals until they get off the wait list, if they so choose.
Can you clarify, is that the number 28?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good standing. We've talked about minimal rental activity. This kind of follows that same split. ISTR license would still be required to meet a minimum rental activity because we are interested in knowing the true number of ISTR licenses. And if you have no rental activity, we would revoke your ISTR, offer you an LSTR. And the goal of that is to create churn in the wait list. We're about 155 licenses over the cap today. We know that approximately 135 licenses reported the minimum amount of activity last year. We don't know between 0 and 2,000, but less than $2,000. So
Say that one more time, because that's very important for people to hear. That we're that close, because people are thinking, oh my God, we're so far away. We're really not. If we enforce that minimum, especially we've talked about raising it and stuff, that's $2,000 was the minimum you said? That's what we require now?
Well, that's the minimum. When you report a license, you have to pay on $2,000 of income, regardless if you made 0.
Right.
So we don't know who made $532, who made $1,789, but we know who made $2,000 or less.
I got you.
And it's
Okay.
about 135.
Thank you.
Could we do a hybrid, do 2,000 plus the days that we spoke about?
for the good standing, you guys have leeway to design it how you like. But for the purposes of this, it would only apply to ISTR licenses.
Understood.
LSTR licenses, if we allow anyone to get one, then we have no interest in making sure they're using it to rent.
I think it's important to point out, because a lot of the emails we received, people are like, we need to do certain things first, but no, we're actually a lot closer than people think. So we do need to kind of do all these at the same time and work through them, because we're gonna be there before we know it. Especially if we step that up like we've already discussed.
And another point to that, I know, and we're gonna talk about the wait list in a minute, but it's a chicken and an egg problem, because the form of the wait list depends on the decisions you guys make about heirs, about property purchases. Depending on how you go that way, the wait list could be radically different. So we'll get to the wait list next, but yes, it's very much, both are dependent on each other.
That's why I kind of thought if we put it on there, we just, like, every meeting, we'll have to maybe adjust that, just to kind of keep that as a continuing conversation, depending on what we do with the other stuff. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, thank you. So next up, allowing heirs and new owners, you know, these in my mind are really two of the central questions that folks are asking. Right now, if you have an ISTR, your heir is not automatically entitled to an ISTR. If you sell your property, the person who buys it is not automatically entitled to an ISTR. Their options are the wait list or nothing. So this would create a middle option for 72 night rentals. If you inherit a property, if you buy a property, and you want an ISTR, you can get on the wait list, but in the meantime, 72 days of rentals is what we would offer.
I guess I have a question about language. Most of the citizens have asked me, how about a niece, or how about my partner? Is there a way that we can change the heir to beneficiary?
What difference does it make? We're gonna have to list where that goes, so it doesn't go to your second cousin twice removed. So originally we had a list, it was like your mother, your father, your daughter, your son.
Wasn't there a standard?
There has been a proposal for only immediate family, but if council wishes to change that to the person who inherited the property, you have that right.
Thank you.
I have no children. But, you know, in general, beneficiary, inheritor, any name you want, but that is something council will have to decide if we're talking about not this, you know, in the general term of ISTR inheritance, if that only goes to family members, how big the family member is, or if it goes to whoever gets the property.
Correct, thank you.
So, multi-units or commercial districts, that's not meant to say those things are equal. They're similar, but not equal. This is another big discussion in terms of the ISTR, whether or not to limit, exempt them if they're in a multi-unit building or the commercial district, or some combination of both, to concentrate the ISTRs kind of in the commercial district. So following a similar theme, that discussion would then move to only ISTR licenses and LSTR licensing in any dwelling unit, anywhere, 72 days. But we would still need to come back and address whether or not to allow a concentration of ISTRs in multi-unit buildings or in commercial districts. So this wouldn't answer that question in terms of ISTRs. We still need to make a plan for that. And now, so that's that. Wes, will you go back a slide, please? So before we get into the wait list, that's our introduction to the idea of an LSTR. We only had a limited amount of time to prepare. I think we've invested enough time in it to give you guys an idea of how it works. We don't want to go too much further down any path. We're just presenting ideas for consideration to get feedback. So now we're willing to hear, we're waiting to hear your feedback so we know whether this is off the table. You know, we should bring it back in a couple weeks.
I like the ideas, some of the ideas in here, maybe not the whole thing. And after this weekend, I think we really need to look at the number. So if we're gonna increase the number of people potentially renting, then I think the cap number needs to come down. Instead of 125 offset, which is what we basically said, I think that ought to be 2 for 1, like 250 offset off the cap. You know, Mother Nature reminds you how fast our island changes overnight. And with that change in effect, you know, in recent memory, I think we really need to look at total number of days that anything gets rented out here. But, you know, everybody, 90% of the population out here are on septic tanks, which are very fragile when you have flooding. And who knows what the next flood's gonna be. I thought I had everything in my house covered for this flood. Wrong answer. But anyway, so that's just something for council to keep in mind, I think, as we go forward, talking about licenses and rental licenses and stuff. Some of the ideas are great. So answers a lot of questions, some of them may be tweaked, but I just think, keep in mind how fast our environment on this island changes.
I like the LSTR because I think it takes care of all the exceptions and all the problems, and creates one path to ISTR. I'd also agree with the mayor that, you know, maybe we should do a bigger reduction in light of the numbers that Mr. Bazell talked about. And then in August, if we don't have the rush that Chris was talking about, then we can always adjust the cap. But it is better to decrease it by more and just cover ourselves for what might be an explosion. And then this time next year, we can look and say, well, we didn't have the explosion, maybe 200 was too much or not enough. And I think if we balance it like that, for every ISTR that comes off, it's 365 rental days. For every limited you add on, it's 72 days. So if it was 100, you'd have 36,000 days coming off, and if you added 100 LSTRs, you're adding 7,200. That's 5 to 1 reduction in available rental days. And
Well,
I think
but
the other thing
but
that-
every ISTR that comes off, with the waiting list, one's going to go back on.
Well,
So that's gonna be a
This
zero.
will create churn on that list, but the other thing it does is, everybody's worried about investors and out-of-state money pouring in here for investor properties, and the LSTR doesn't make us more attractive for out-of-state investors, because investors look for their money to work 365 days a year, not just 72 days a year. And if adding 72 days in the summertime increases the supply of available rentals during that time, with supply increase, demand decrease, or, you know, so you'd end up having what you could charge come down, which makes it even less advantageous for an investor. And eventually the market's gonna balance itself, but if you're worried about that, then the mayor's right. It should be a bigger decrease to start with to accommodate what may happen, and then in a year you can adjust it. But this takes care of, I'm sorry, just to wrap up, this takes care of all the exceptions, all the errors, all the out-of-state stuff, and we don't have to make special exceptions. We don't have to create the path. It treats everybody the same, that our attorney recommends, that, you know, everybody gets treated alike, and that's exactly what this does. But go ahead, Chris.
Well, I think you made a point where if I'm an ISTR and I drop off the list, I'm just gonna get back so the wait list is gonna be pretty much stabilized and even grow, because people that are investors are just gonna go to the bottom and wait their turn again. What we're essentially doing with this is just basically subsidizing their wait list time. We're giving them 72 days they didn't have, so now we're offsetting their cost to be on the wait list. You know, I ran on livability, community, and balance. This, as presented, I think goes against all of that. We have a dramatic increase in short-term rentals during the peak months in the summer. I worry about the resources it takes. You look at the studies that show that one STR takes the same amount of city resources as 5 residential houses. So there's a big impact that we have that would, add 400, or let's say we had 300, you know, that's like adding 1,500 more residences to the island for the peak season. So there's a lot of negatives I see with this. As presented, I ran the numbers all weekend. If a person inherits a pretty sizable mortgage, 72 days isn't really going to help them make up the difference to keep the house. The other side of it, if we give them 72 days and then their second home, you've got average second home buyer uses their house 55 times a year. So you've got a house that's gonna be empty for 220 days or so, every year. So I don't know how that helps build our community and helps move us forward as an island. There's a lot of downside to this, the way it's presented.
I think some 72-day renters aren't looking for a net zero, that they're just hoping to decrease the loss. And so
But why
while
are
you
we
might,
subsidizing of that loss if they're, if you're an investor, I don't get subsidized on my stocks. I mean, it's the same situation.
it cracks the door to ownership, to residency. It
Wow.
cracks the door to that.
If they want to be a resident, they get established residency, rent their other house and get an OSTR. I mean, there's ways to go about this.
There's also a good bit of this population that live out here now that rented their house out first and then moved out here. It was a pathway to ownership for them. People that are here currently that have been here for a long time. So it's not just, oh, they can rent their other house out. No, this was the spot to rent out because it paid for it and then they ended up moving into it. So it is a pathway to ownership. I tend to think that the bigger houses, 72 is not gonna be enough for investment people, but maybe the condos are. So you get them out of residential and it opens up more commercial property because a condo is cheaper. So 72 nights is more applicable for them to break even. And that way you get the rentals out of residential and put them in commercial where they belong, where we were trying to get them before anyway.
Well, wait a minute. Condos aren't cheaper. The real estate folks put out the information that, our property values went down 14% for houses, and condos and townhouses at the same time went up 28%. So condos aren't cheaper.
Okay.
To buy.
There are certain condos in this commercial district that are cheaper than a house on Fifth Block. You know that. You know that we're buying $3 million houses, you get a condo a lot cheaper. I'm not gonna argue over which one's which, but it'll help get them out of residential and put the STRs in commercial. It's a box that gets checked a little bit, because we were talking about a way to do that. There's no viable way to really do that. So I mean, it does check a lot of boxes. I have my questions about it as well. But if you look at it on a nightly rental basis, even where it's at now, with the proposal for the 675 or whatever, it drastically lowers the rental nights available. Right now, you're looking at 292,000 rental nights with 800 ISTR licenses. If you drop it to 675, you lose 45,000 rental nights. Assuming that there's 40% ISTR, 40% resident, say 20%, and that's a huge number, would get this temporary, the LSTR, whatever, you're still lowering the rental nights over 20,000. And if we even lower the cap number even more, then you're increasing that number a lot. So it does save in the rental night capacity. It opens up more properties for rentals, but the rental night capacity for the island goes down severely. So there's a lot less rental activity, even though it's
Did you
more
base that
places.
on 365, I guess?
I based the ISTR on 365 and the LSTR on
Yeah.
72.
But I guess my argument is people are gonna rent during the peak nightly rental night.
I hear, and I'm not
Yeah,
arguing
yeah,
against that.
yeah.
I'm just saying if you look at it on a nightly basis, where their proposal's at, we already lose over 20,000 rental nights. And if we lower the cap number even more, that number just increases. So if you look at it on a rental night capacity, we're doing a lot better. There's different ways to look at it. That's one of the reasons I was like, yeah, let's talk about it, because it has merit. I still have reservations about some of it, but at least it does. It's got some good points.
But remember, what I talked about early on is the environmental impact. So whether you reduce the number of rental nights in the area that's on sewer, doesn't matter. It's if you increase the number of nights in the rest of the world, which is what's gonna happen.
I've been chewing on that since you brought it up, because this
Yeah,
weekend was a
it
good
is.
reminder of just a
Yes,
way to
sir.
kind of incorporate that into this, because that is a good point. And with, I know you and I have talked about this way, because I'd love to get more ISTRs out of residential into the commercial district. There just isn't a fair and equitable way to do it. I'd love for it to be on sewer, but can't expand sewer.
Mr. Pope, after you finish the notes. I'm not going to get into the details of the numbers right now. To me, that's debatable. We can do that at a later time. One of my issues is that I promised citizens that I would honor the question that was asked, that was voted. And so I asked this morning, for what did the citizens vote for? And it's pretty clear that Although it's simple, it's 800. So that's the beginning of what I'm saying, and I'm starting at sort of the vision and the big picture. Because I trust that all of us can figure out the numbers, the quantification. However, I am distressed somewhat about the timing of this, because we have a goal. We have a goal to get to the business license in February. To me, there also is a lack of data. We haven't lived with any of this to know exactly what some of those numbers could be. So we're trying to predict things in the future that are quite difficult to predict with all the variables involved. I also understood that I thought we were phasing in certain things. So the first thing that we needed to honor was that we needed to clean up some of the issues to move forward. We've done that. I think we've been honorable about that. Now, these are the areas where there has to be significant research and debate. And at this point, I really am somewhat concerned, but I think we're going to fold it in. I really need to know the details and the options of the wait list, because I think there's a synergy between both. And I feel somewhat lacking in the knowledge because I need to understand the big picture so that I don't repeat mistakes and don't have enough knowledge to base it on the facts. So that is, in summary, saying I'm not a fan of this proposal. I question it. I need more homework. And I think we'll end up with what we need to end up, but right now the timing of this is quite difficult.
Well, I would just say to your question of predicting, as long as you're sitting on a city government council, you're gonna be predicting something. So you're not gonna have all of the information you ever want at any one point in time.
I completely understand that. And that is why I would recommend that we get to the goals that we need to get to for February and then get back at work to what we need to predict. I
And this
don't have
is-
a problem with
And
that.
this is trying to get to the goals for February, because they want a hard and fast set of rules and regulations about licenses, what's gonna happen, what's not gonna happen. So as we move on, that's fine.
And
As to the wait list, we can talk about this all day long unless y'all wanna talk about it some more.
If we can move on to the wait list, is that what you're thinking?
That's what I'm thinking.
The wait-
Unless
wait
somebody
list
else has got a
is-
question.
Wait list is next.
Well, my little 2 cents worth. The two things that most people, I would say, were looking for was a way to legacy, a way to hand off to their family, multifamily houses / business district. With this proposal, the LSTRs kind of solves both of them in some ways. So it does have some merit and some legs when that's concerned. Of course, I do have concerns, as the mayor had put it, of overutilizing some of the environmental issues and what that number is. And, you know, Mr. Farley spoke of reducing the cap, you know, if it's 675 or 500 or what have you. But I think that gets back to what you guys were looking at to determine license utilization and saturation rates for comparison, and looking at the average rental rate for an ISTR or the number of days. And even at looking at some of the OSTRs, because I think traditionally the island has been, and it's changed a little bit, of course, but a third rental, a third people that don't rent, they just come as a second home, and then a third of full-timers. That's evolved a little bit, and it's kind of lava lamp, as I call it, has moved around. But, you know, to look at what would the impact be as a good guess, I don't think that everybody who has an LSTR or a second home is gonna wanna rent it. And if they do, would they rent it for the entire 72 days? And again, as Chris had mentioned, it ran some numbers, I ran some numbers on, you know, like $1 million house. You know, it runs $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month with PITI, plus maintenance, plus you know, everything else that you would come across. So it's very difficult for somebody to buy $1 million house and pay for it and make money as an investor down the road. So I'm looking at some of those variables, but I think it's very important that we do get some of these numbers to make a final decision come February.
I agree.
Yeah, so.
Any other comments? Wait list.
Well, just that, one thing y'all might want to weigh in to your guesstimating is that, like I agree with what Billy said a little bit, because people that come rent out these houses, it's no walk in the park. and they impact your house. You might get 9 great families that came and had a good time, but that one that writes on your mirror and, you know, drags their luggage down your hallways, it's big overhead to do vacation rental. So just weigh that into it too, that it's not all this, I mean, money, the gross is a big figure, but there's also a lot of overhead. And there's a lot less guys on the beach that you can just run into at, you know, Burt's or whatever. Hey, come over and I got a sink that's not draining right. You know, those type of guys used to keep the island running. It's not, those guys aren't around anymore. So now you're hiring big box companies. They're coming out with their wrap vehicles and they gonna charge you $65 just to knock on your door. So
I wanna get who you using.
well, see, that's what I'm saying is that there's not as many, you know, of the sole proprietor type guys around and girls around Folly Beach that do that type of home maintenance that, you know, the agencies will tell you that they all had their, you know, couple guys that go around and, you know, run out to a house and hose off raccoon poop off the back deck when people are getting ready to check in, because the agency was smart enough to do a quality control check before the people came, and you know, so those people aren't around anymore. So all I'm saying is that doing vacation rental is no walk in the park, and if you're only doing it for 72 days, you know, I could see a lot of people going, let's just keep the house. We'll find another way to augment our income than to deal with the public and tourists.
I want to say one last thing. Eddie made at one point, these guys aren't around anymore. One thing that we're facing too is a shortage of long-term rentals on the island. And what does this do to that market? If I've got the option to rent 72 days throughout the year, am I going to sign a 6-month lease or 12-month lease? Probably not. That number's going to continue to shrink.
I came up with my list over the weekend too. Those are long-term renters.
I agree.
There's a market out there for, it's called midterm renting. It gets a lot of like travel nurses and stuff, and there's websites that they're like 30 to 30-day leases that you can rent 90 at a time. So my question would be, if you had a 72-day license, would those midterm be part of your 72 days, or is that a different type of rental? Therefore, you can get 2 dogs running at the same time.
Right now, all short-term rental licenses have short-term rental nights for periods of less than 29 days, but they also allow contracts of 30 days or more as a long-term rental that don't count against your rental.
So you would be able to get your 72 days and then turn around in the winter and rent, as long as it's 30 days or more. It's not a short-term rental, so you can do that action too, right?
Right. And that's how it functions today.
So, you know, I don't know.
Any other questions?
All right, thank you.
The long
I
awaited,
think I got some good notes. We'll figure out how to translate them and go from there.
so the long awaited wait
So
list.
for the wait list, right off the top, a wait list for short-term rentals is not new. There are models in this county, there are models in the state, there are models in the country. We can get a wait list in relatively quick order, and we've had a lot of good ideas from the public and from council about their particular version of the wait list. But the problem is that there's no consensus from the public feedback or the council feedback or staff feedback about the foundational principle of how we organize the wait list. Before we get into the details of how many points you get for how long you lived where, we need to decide what is the format of the wait list. Very broadly speaking, there's 3 categories. There's a random wait list. Anybody can sign up at any time. When a license comes available, you reach in, you pull a number out of the hat, that person gets a license. They're offered a license if they want to take it. That is, in my opinion, the fairest way to do it, because everyone on the wait list has an equal chance to get any license at any time. So we'll call that one a random wait list. And there's first come, first serve for the wait list, which says The wait list is open next Tuesday at midnight. That's just an example. It's not open. Get on it. Everyone gets a timestamp. We can do it online, we can do it on paper. Everyone's thing is timestamped. You're first to apply, you're first in line for a license. And that prioritizes people who sign up before other people. And the third kind is of some sort of preferential wait list, which says, yeah, we've got a wait list, but we want to prioritize certain application criteria, or things that have been talked about is your residency status. Are you a full-time resident already? Are you a property owner already? How long have you lived here? How long have you owned here? Those are two different things. Are you related to someone who died and had a license? Did you buy a property from someone who had a license? There are many, many factors you can choose from to rank the wait list. But before we really go down deep in the weeds of how many points you get for owning 10 years versus living here for 4 years and not owning, we need to know from council, random, first come, first serve, or preferential.
Let me give you a fourth one. The fourth one would be kind of a combination of random and first come, first serve. Random in that we set a time saying you can apply for the wait list till February the 1st, just using these numbers. We take those names, however many that is, have a lottery for those names to put them in order. That determines the first 500, 600, however many names come in. After that is whoever comes in, as you said, time stamped, this is when you apply, just put you in the wait list in that pecking order going down. That's kind of a fourth one.
I mean, it has to be like that. I mean, people line up for weeks for a Taylor Swift concert. I mean, you said Tuesday. If everybody thought that was it, they'd start camping out now to be first in line for that. So I think the mayor's right. The initial has to be random, and then after that, it can be the first come, first served. I also think that one of the tenets should be, and I know I disagree with some friends that are out here, is I don't think you should apply for a license until you're ready to rent. And when your number comes up, you get 60 days to execute on that rental license. And if you don't, then you go back in line. We can't have people just sitting on priorities for the wait list. And I think that will cut down some of the randomness in the very beginning, because you won't have people that are just wanting to get in line for a placeholder and then sit number one on the list, and like the line at Walmart where you just step out and say, hey, I'm not ready yet, you can go ahead, but I'm still ahead of this guy or that
Yeah.
guy.
No, I agree with you. I think, I didn't say that a minute ago, but yeah, we've talked, Mr. Pope and I've talked about that 100 times. Since, like, your name comes up on, you come up on the list because the opening's open. Well, I'm gonna give you 24 hours to get back with me, or 48 hours to get back with me and sign up for this thing, or you're gone. You just go to the bottom of the list, and the next person up is up for 24, 48 hours, or whatever, however long that is. If they
I'd be a
don't
little
answer,
more-
you're at the bottom of the list.
Be a little more generous than 48 hours.
But if you're on the wait list, you should know whether you're gonna take it or
And no
not.
matter what
What it is.
format it is, when your term comes up, you use it or lose it.
Yes.
Mr. Farley,
Yeah.
your license is available. I don't want a license for 5 more, okay, you're off the list, we go to the next person. That's across all types of wait lists, otherwise it's impossible to manage.
Yeah.
Well, because they can get the license, they don't necessarily have to start renting the second they get a license in their hand. I mean, they can have the license and
Unless
get
they
their
establish-
ducks in a row and
unless
start
they establish a
renting.
minimum rental period.
Right.
Well, they still got a year to do it.
Yeah, they got time.
Eddie, you finished, Michelle?
Mm.
My thoughts are this seems this is gonna be a continual item as we work through the rest of the possible amendments. I'd like to see two. I like what Tim and Bill are saying. If we go through and we don't do the LSTR, if we go through each individual proposed amendment and tweak those, then I like their idea for the wait list. If we're doing just a flat, the LSTR for everybody, no inheritance, none of that, then I like a preferential wait list, just because it gives things like length of residency. You have some people like, people who've lived here 30 years and are planning on that helps them get up quicker than somebody that's looking for an investment. It takes care of our residents a little more in my mind. If we're just gonna do the flat, everybody can do this, it's just another way to kind of limit investment people and keep our residents taken care of.
Well, just remember when you talk about wait list, any of this stuff, you don't wanna create an administrative nightmare for the staff.
No,
You start doing preferential treatments and points and all, it's gonna.
So, hold on, what I was gonna finish with was, you said there's models out there for all of these. I would say if we could see a model of what Tim and Bill are talking about, and then a model of the preferential wait list, just as a starting point, maybe that'll say, okay, this is an administration nightmare, let's scrap this and go this way. But at least that gives us two different options while we're going through everything else, because we've said that the wait list is gonna depend on what we do with the rest of it. So let's have two options. If we go through each individual one, we've got, one option that gives us, anyway, it gives us a continuous conversation, but at least we're going down a path.
But if we give weight to the residents initially and do that randomized order, say they get 5 ping pong balls in the lottery instead of 1, just for example, we do that the first time, we build the list, then you don't have to administrate anything else. You just put people at the end every year.
Well, that depends again, like Mr. Pope said. Do you wanna put, if I'm a resident, I'm not gonna put my name on the wait list. Cause I'm a resident, I'm not planning on doing anything. So, if I put my name on the wait list, why, I just don't understand why you would run out there and put your name on the wait list if you're a resident, you're not gonna go anywhere.
There's gonna be a lot of people that do that.
I mean, I'm not saying there won't be people to do that, that's why, and that goes back to why we wanted to establish a minimum amount, more than
That's
just
where
the
we're gonna have to get with the other
$2,000.
ones, yeah.
But if we limit exemptions and we do what we're talking about, the wait list is gonna work as it should, because we're gonna be near that 800 number at all time. If we keep giving exceptions, then, I think that affects
Well,
everything.
and what I was talking about the wait list is just a way to start it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you just put your name on the list after that,
Yeah.
but anyway.
Okay, I would like to just follow up with just the concept of a wait list. Honestly, my career was built on wait lists, whether it be to get into classes, or whether it be to graduate, or whether it be to get into the residence halls. All of it is doable administratively. I really believe in the staff, and I believe that whatever we decide can be administered. In light of that, I also believe that we do need to look at some form of a weighted system for the people that have resided here, that need potentially to be subsidized one way or the other. So I do think there could be a hybrid. I think there could be 2 tracks, and later on I can explain to you why I believe that. But I do believe we could do a hybrid system that some people have talked about, and I think that I would like to see weighted with a combination of random.
I would go primarily with preferential as a base point. Again, depending on how we do a first come, first serve or a random lottery, it takes care of the residents. Again, I don't think the residents are gonna move, but it at least gives them an opportunity based off, 5 years, 10 years, 40 years that they've lived here. And if, the city is available or capable of doing a 2-tiered. Perhaps where if you're on there, if you're not ready to go, you at least get thrown over to a preferential list to where if something happens or down the road that you do wanna go, you may be able to get back in line.
So how far down that preferential list do we go when this list over here says, I'm not ready? Do we just take 1 off the preferential list? Do we take 5 off the preferential list? When you make 2 lists, then you gotta create more rules and
Well, we
regulations.
get into the semantics of those after we see some base models and we go through the rest of these
So
conversations.
it really depends, again, what DJ was hitting on. If we went with the LSDR way, covers a lot. Or if we don't, and we just go with legacy and a multifamily and condense that, then that changes, I think, a lot of it, how you wait list in the number as well.
And
We've
this
got-
conversation is kind of why we've asked you guys to go through the amendments and make decisions before we design a wait list, because
Chicken or the egg.
Yeah, I mean, prior to today, I was like, I'm not gonna support any of these amendments if we don't do the wait list. But now, I think that the wait list is gonna be contingent upon what amendments are passed or not passed. Like what DJ said, if we don't pass amendments, then I lean more towards the preferential.
I'd like to follow up with, sorry, you did?
No, go ahead.
I'd like to follow up with what Mr. Grooms said. There actually is a way of suspending folks on the wait list, and then we follow up with that. I won't get into the details to debate, but there is a way to suspend a wait list and then move it along, just as an option.
So, would you guys like to further discuss the wait list and some models at the next meeting, or go back to the amendments? Because we need, this is a fundamental question, whether we design the wait list first.
All right,
Or address
I want to
it.
answer that.
All right.
Go back to the amendments. We're gonna talk about this wait list 100 times, and it's all gonna come back to, we need to know what we're waiting for. So let's create what we're waiting for before we create a wait list.
I agree.
And what we can do is get a couple model wait lists, and as we go through the amendments, if you process, just like Councilman Rich said, as we go through the amendments, this is how model 1, 2, or 3 would work on the wait list. And kind of do them at the same time, but really, something needs to be decided first.
I understand the need for the sequence, but I appreciate the fact that you're willing to look at both simultaneously so that we understand the impact of both.
So right now, our next meeting is scheduled for city council meeting in January, which is January the 9th. We'll probably want to make that one of the longer meetings, and maybe start earlier in the day, running up to the city. We only really have 2 hours between 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock. Because what I'd like to do is bring this back, bring all the things we've discussed already back with some draft language, and then we still have a couple topics we haven't even got to yet.
So how about, let's look at the next meeting to be the 4th or the 5th of January for a work session. And we can talk about, or do you need more time than that?
If we do it on the 9th, we could just get a recap of what they've come up with so far. And then kind of like Aaron said, he kind of narrowed down everything we talked about today, present it to us, and then the following Tuesday, get into it. That gives us time to see what these guys, see what they come up with. It gives them time to come up with stuff too. Let's face it, I mean, it's the holiday time. Staff's gonna be in and out. That gives them plenty of time to come up with some better language for us to look at. Then it gives us a week, then we can get our teeth into it.
We just won't give me any time off.
Well, hey man, that's your call, man.
Mr. Pope, what's
Come on,
reasonable
Rich.
when you look at the schedule and,
When we originally set it, we did set it for the 9th, just because of Christmas and New Year's. The scope is expanded a little bit, so I think the 9th would give us more time. We can certainly have something ready on the 4th to make some progress.
Okay, so the 9th is fine, as long as y'all understand that after the 9th, you're gonna be back here because you're pushing up against the time limit on the 1st in February.
You already told us we're gonna be here every Tuesday, so let's
Yeah.
just do it.
and so basically we get our packets at the usual time, which could have predictably have been, you know, when we were to meet. So we'll get our packets, do the homework over the weekend, and come back on the 9th.
Yep. And then, you know, at the 9th, we will need to look at additional dates. That doesn't have to be on Tuesday, but between the 9th and the 12th, or the 13th of February, we need to have some sort of consensus and finality so we can get things in front of you. And we will most likely need a special council meeting for first and or second reading to get this done.
You just go to James Allen County Park and have an all-day battle royale with everything on the table, weapons included, just where it goes, it goes.
So we should be prepared on the 9th with our calendars to make sure that we fit in enough meetings.
And-
Thank you.
All right, and let's tentative right now, you wanna set the meeting on the 9th for 5? Okay.
Could we, there was some discussion last time about incorporating the work session into the regular meeting and just starting the regular meeting and breaking to the work session so that we don't either have to stop the work session when the regular meeting was to start, or we
Well,
don't have.
but our regular meeting is conducted different than our work session. I keep them separate.
We had to move I don't wanna wait till 7 o'clock to, you know, like have the meeting and start the work session at 8:30. We could move the regular meeting to 5 and then just break for the work session afterwards, so that you guys.
That would give us time, and then we wouldn't have to wait till the announced time for the regular meeting. It would just start when we came out of the work
I
session.
think they're lucky
But-
because it's not a national championship game this year.
But, because we conduct them differently, I don't wanna combine them.
So 5 o'clock on the 9th? and come with our calendars.
And then we will be interrupted, but we can always resume the work session after the regular meeting.
So the 9th is Tuesday, right?
Right,
We
that's
usually,
Hey, yeah,
Just the
start,
next, so our next meeting is what would normally be the second Tuesday, right?
right. Yes,
Correct.
sir.
well, you start early on the 9th, and hopefully you'll get through a lot of these questions. It's going, you got 2 hours to bang it out.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Does that mean we're out?
All right, that means we're
7:15.
done.
What?
do we have to?
Awesome. Even use the gavel. So proud.
Oh, Ken,